live on
All
Facebook.
right. Just let me know, Angie, when you're on.
Okay.
Good. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. So I think I know some of you, not all of you. So I'm Bob Kyle. I'm the city manager here with the City of Roanoke. Of course, Angie O'Brien, who is our Chief Strategy Officer, who has helped set this up. So I want to thank you all for joining us either here in the webinar or anyone that's joining us live on Facebook as well. This is one of the continued community conversations around this discussion regarding the American Rescue Plan Act and the city's use of those funds. So what I'm going to do is give a little bit of background and kind of overview of different aspects of this particular outreach effort, kind of put it within the context of all of the other things that we're doing. And then really this is intended to hear from you all, either through chat, or since we're a small group, we'll probably end up just opening up your mics and having you add to the contribution as we go through this discussion. Anyone that's joining on Facebook certainly can post on Facebook, not that anyone is hesitant to do that normally anyway, or certainly can email us as well as we go through this discussion. So I'm going to start first with a little bit of a description as to what the American Rescue Plan Act is, and kind of put it within, again, the context of all of the efforts that the federal and state government have put forward in trying to respond to COVID. And I'm going to start that off by sharing with you all just a little bit of the various programs over the last 18 months that have actually been put in place through action by Congress. So there was the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Act. That was back in March of 2020, and that was for $8.3 billion. And that was really what was used to fuel the development of the vaccine and therapeutics, as well as medical supplies and so on. Then there was the Families First Coronavirus Response Act in April of 2020. That was $192 billion. And that was really what got the unemployment benefits and extended family leave and sick leave and those types of things started back in 2020. Then there was the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, better known as the CARES Act. And that one is the one that we were most familiar with. And it was $2.2 trillion, and it was issued in March of 2020. And that included some of the items that I just mentioned, but also was the first time that there was funding available for small businesses, education, students, eviction actions, or eviction avoidance actions, utility reliefs, and a whole host of other things. And I'll come back to that one in a few moments because it's relevant to this particular conversation as well. Then there was the Paycheck Protection Program and Healthcare Enhancement Act. That was in April of 2020. $483 billion was provided for that. That obviously was predominantly focused on helping businesses be able to make payroll to keep folks gainfully employed while this activity was going, or while the virus was going on. Then there was the Consolidated Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act in December of 2020. That was $900 billion, and that provided relief directly to individuals. Those were the stimulus checks that folks received, along with additional paycheck protection programs and some relief to state and local governments, and again, utility assistance, food assistance, and so on. And then there is the latest, which is, of course, the American Rescue Plan Act, and you may hear me default to referring to it as ARPA, and I apologize, but it's the American Rescue Plan Act. It was approved, of course, in March of 2021 and was for $1.9 trillion. Includes many of the same benefits that those other programs, or extends those benefits the other programs mentioned. And it was also one other notable achievement in that act, in that It is actually the first time in American history, actually, that there has been direct contribution made between the federal government and local units of government to provide aid in this manner. So these funds are not funds that are being routed through the states. They're not funds that we're applying to the federal government for. These are funds that Congress authorized goes directly to the localities, again, which was not included in any of the other bills that I just mentioned, but was in this one. So obviously, probably what stands out the most in those is a significant amount of money. There has been a tremendous amount of money provided through the federal government, through congressional action, and in many cases also then provided by the state, because a lot of money went to the states and the states could then choose what to do with those dollars. And in many cases, certainly in the case of Virginia, those dollars were sent to localities to administer in the locality, not for the locality, but to administer for programs. So let me step back to the CARES Act for just a second. The CARES Act was really the first one that the city got directly involved in. And again, this was passed back in March of 2020 and provided a number of different reliefs. But what it really did here in Virginia, most of those dollars were sent to the state, and the state decided how much, if any, would go to the localities. Virginia maximized the amount that would go to the localities. So in our case, we received about $16 million from the state of Virginia. And the purpose was to get that money out into the community, help individuals, help households, help small businesses, help those that are suffering other consequences, be it homelessness, mental health issues, healthcare, all of those types of things. And so that was a program that the city ran in partnership with many others. Key to that was community engagement. And so in order for the council to determine the best way to use those dollars, they engaged in a series of outreach efforts and engagement efforts that included individual conversations with key stakeholders. It included a collection of virtual focus group meetings. It included meetings like this that we're having as well. And it included the formation ultimately of an advisory panel made up of about 34, 36 residents, citizens, business owners from the community. And they actually formulated a proposal and recommendations to the council as to how those dollars would be best spent in our community. And for the most part, that's what the council did. They followed those recommendations, and money was provided in the form of grants to small businesses. It was provided to support the virtual learning academies that went on in the school as students moved into a virtual environment. It was used to support the arts groups and artists themselves who were found basically unemployed. It was used to directly fund our low and no cost health clinics in our community and so on. It was those types of programs that came out of that. The American Rescue Plan Act is significantly more dollars. So that was $16 million. The city of Roanoke over the next 2 years will receive about $64.5 million through the American Rescue Plan Act. The state of Virginia will additionally receive about $4 billion out of that same act. And some of those dollars that the state will receive, they will use. Some of those dollars that the state receives, they will forward on, have already indicated, they will forward on to towns and others that did not get a direct funding allocation from the federal government. And in other instances, they're going to make the majority of those dollars available actually for programs that they will initiate and make available. But $64.5 million is what we're starting with. I won't go into the details of the rest of the ARPA funds, but just to give you a sense that even though we are receiving that $64.5 million, the state is getting $4 billion. There are also a whole host of other programs that are being directly funded by the federal government. And those include, again, of course, there was additional stimulus money that went to individuals, but it includes also funding that's going to the schools. So there's an additional $51 million, for example, coming directly to the Roanoke City Public Schools out of this program. And that is not a part of our $64.5 million. That's in addition to that $64.5 million. There's money going toward Head Start. There was money that went to the Federal Transit Agency that will assist further in transit issues. There was more money that went to the airports across the country and so on. There's several others that are in there. The significance of that is that it allows us as a locality to work together to figure out then the best places to spend the $64.5 million, so as to leverage those investments that the federal government is making and the state government is making in other areas, rather than duplicate those. So there's a lot of programs, a lot of funding, a lot of opportunity, and our challenge here locally is to figure out where there are gaps and where those gaps can be closed in the most transformative fashion. So that's the intent of this. The council has undertaken a process for this decision, very similar to the CARES Act. We just concluded about 9 focus group meetings, which involved well over 100 individuals. We also, again, assembled a number of individual stakeholder interviews, and we'll continue to do those along the way. And last night, actually, the council selected 36 members of the community to serve on an advisory panel, and we are doing these town hall meetings, and we'll continue to do meetings like this throughout the period that the work is being done. The intent is that the advisory panel will assemble at the end of this month and meet all through August and make recommendations to the city council in September. So from a timing standpoint, September is when the council will ultimately begin making its final decisions as to how these dollars will be spent. The city will actually receive its funding over 2 years. So we have already received the first half of the money. So we have over $32 million already in our possession. The city will receive the second half roughly a year from now, slightly less than a year from now. We will have basically 2 to 3 years to spend all of the money. Obviously, the Department of Treasury has provided a certain level of instructions, and they will continue to provide more instructions as we go along as to the rules for the funding of this program. Some of the ways in which the funding has been authorized to be spent and the way in which other communities have indicated that they're going to spend the money include expansion of broadband throughout the community and connectivity, water and wastewater infrastructure investments again in K through 12 schools, addressing housing and homelessness, addressing transportation, especially transit, small business assistance, and of course, health and human services. Those are just some of the examples. It is certainly not an exhaustive list by any means, but some of the ways in which communities are already beginning to kind of think about how they'll do this. So that's sort of the money, that's kind of the program as it exists, and purpose for these types of discussions and efforts. Everything that we're doing, including this meeting, will be ultimately available online so that folks that are unable to join us will be able to actually visit that. The notes from all of those focus group meetings that I just referenced will be posted up on the website so folks can read through those as well. And again, we'll have several other ways that individuals can continue to be involved in this process, even if they're not serving on the advisory panel as it works its way through as well. So with that overview and introduction, as I said, really the purpose of these town hall meetings is to hear from you and from your ideas and suggestions and even questions as we go through. So I'm going to open it up here in just a second. I would pose for you 2 questions to stimulate really the thought and the ideas that might flow from this. One of those is, from your particular perception and your perspective, what do you consider the most significant COVID-related impacts that are present in our community? So what basically has been affected the most by COVID over these last 16 to 18 months? That would be one question. And then, of course, the follow-up question, obviously, we have $64.5 million. So what best way to address what you consider to be those most significant impacts? So those are 2 questions just to kind of stimulate sort of the conversation and thinking. And of course, again, also feel free to ask any questions that you might have. Since we are a small group on this the webinar today, what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and open it up and ask each of you to unmute when you have a suggestion or a question, and we will jump into this discussion. So Judy, I see you have unmuted, so fire away.
I'm a retired teacher. I actually have lived in Roanoke City almost all my life, but I worked in Roanoke County. And what I see and have seen in the past year or so, over a year, is the impact on education, on actually school children and teachers. And I know that still Roanoke City, because they're trying to hire, they've had a hard time filling all their positions. So that is one area where I'm hoping money will help, but a lot of that was fear that older, particularly older teachers, did not want to be in the school. And with that, making sure that there's adequate ventilation and all the other things that are necessary in these schools that are many of them, I know they've been renovated, but they're just older buildings, and you need to be sure that they're safe for children to be in. With the COVID virus on the surge again because of the Delta variant, then I wonder if elementary students, those under 12 years old, are going to be safe when they go back. And I know there was a plan because I work with the Southwest City Pakistan group that meets at Granite Court Baptist. I don't go there. I go to Raleigh Court United Methodist. There are about 7 churches that meet together, and that we've been providing school supplies in the fall and also some in the winter. We provide clothing for the children that, well, particularly Virginia Heights, I think, gets a lot of immigrant children. They arrive with nothing, and we scramble around and get clothes for these children. And of course, the Pack-a-Snack on the weekend, we've not had to do that because they've had so much money from the federal government, which is wonderful. But I hear from the principals, and some of those principals have had to be in the classroom because they couldn't get enough teachers. So yeah, that is my big concern. I'm a retired teacher, and that's been my big concern for the area, that we need to get children in school because so many have floundered by not being in the classroom with the teacher. A friend of mine teaches kindergarten at Wasena, and she said, yeah, you try to get a kindergartner to pay attention, even with their mom sitting right beside them on Zoom. So, all of these are issues, and I don't know that we have any solutions yet, and that money will do it all, but we certainly need to be focusing on children and education.
Thank you, Judy. And I do know, one, those many of the items that you listed are indeed eligible for use of those funds, both the funds that we will receive as well as the funds that the school will receive as well. And I do know in conversation with Roanoke City Public Schools, a significant part of their investment is addressing their ventilation systems to ensure that it is, as safe as it can possibly be. And so certainly those are top of mind. They were top of mind when the CARES Act funding came through, and I'm certain will be top of mind in this case as well. So thank you. I also should mention too that as we're having this conversation, if anyone also, sparks somebody else's comments, spark kind of a thought or anything, feel free to put those in the chat as well as we go through. And Steve, I see you have unmuted as well. So if you want to kind of go ahead and jump in there.
And Steve, before you speak, I'm having a little bit of trouble with Facebook Live, so I'm going to pause it and try to get it back on the right page. So just bear with me for just a second.
Back again? Okay, thank you, Angie. Okay, Steve, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks, Bob. It sounds like under ARPA, there's a fairly broad range of types of programs that can be funded. On the flip side, are there areas that are off limits that we can't spend money on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yes, there are a couple explicit areas that you cannot use the ARPA funding for. One of those is you cannot use it to service debt. So we can't use it to borrow money. You cannot use it, at least right now, this is the case, you cannot use it for reserve fund. So we did not do this, but there were communities across the country that had to dip into their savings account, if you will, in order to balance their budget during COVID. We did not. We actually reduced our budget to balance it. And right now, those communities are not able to take ARPA funds and replenish those reserve funds. There is a movement to try to get that changed, but right now that's off limits. And the other that is explicitly off limits is you cannot use the ARPA funds for anything to do with any municipal or state pensions. So those cannot be used for any of those purposes. Other than that, it's pretty wide open. I didn't go into detail on this, but there is a provision also that is unique in the rescue plan funding that did not exist in any of the others, which is localities can account for, based off of a formula, revenues that were lost as a result of less economic activity in the community, so less tax revenue coming in. And if you do that, those dollars can actually be simply placed back into the general fund and not used necessarily as a part of kind of the direct response. The city council here, we balanced our budget without really knowing that the American Rescue Act would even be available or in what amount. So even though we are accounting for that lost revenue, we're really doing it so that we can remove some of the limitations that are attached with it. But all those dollars are being put right back into this fund. So we will not be using those funds to balance the budget based off of lost revenue. But that was a bit unique. There are some communities that will do that basically took such a big hit economically that they'll just take some of those Rescue Act dollars and balance their budget. And that's fine. The Rescue Act allows that. We will not be doing that. So hopefully that helps with some of the no, you can't do that list. I'm sure that list will grow with time, but right now that's where they are.
Thank you. That is very helpful.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. Thank you. Catherine, any thoughts, comments?
Sure. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Angie, for setting this up. I don't think I prepared enough for this, but appreciate the opportunity to have a voice. Like Judy, I'm from the area. I'm a native of Roanoke and Roanoke City, and so I'm going to put on two hats. One is a citizen, and one is where I work. So I'm going to start with this as a citizen and really echo a little bit of what Judy said in terms of schools. From my perspective, though, I see potentially a need for tutors. I think there's a lot of children who are going to be getting back into the school system and not have the ability to be at the same level that all the other students. They're all going to be on various levels. So I can almost see where that would be a need. And I know that the funding, as I think you mentioned, is 2 years. And I think that maybe will help us get out of that potential cycle, hopefully. So I certainly echo the ventilation and all of that. And I'm certainly glad that the food is available to those who need it. I'm looking at, as we advance our students into the next level and hopefully see them continue on the path of graduation, that tutors would be a potential option and add to that resource. So that's my hat on my citizen hat, and having 2 children go through the city school system. Let me put on my other hat, which is my work hat. I'm with Visit Virginia's Blue Ridge, so I'm here representing tourism. Tourism, I think more than anything, I don't think I would have recognized the amount of, the hit that this industry took because of this pandemic. Our hotels and our restaurants, our attractions, specifically our hotels, and I think that really potentially showed through those revenues that you were mentioning, Bob, through those tax revenues. That's where we generate revenue for our schools and for our services for the city, and certainly it's helpful. So it's almost a cycle, helping the tourism recovery process, especially our hoteliers, will then help propel that funding back into the fund, which then gives money back to our schools and will help. So I'm here to chat just a little bit about our hotels first and foremost. I know that there are some formulas that I've watched in Fairfax and Loudoun County who are looking to give back to on a formula basis to the hoteliers as well as to the restaurants. I know our restaurants are suffering from weekday service and foot traffic, specifically in downtown Roanoke, because there's less people working in downtown, and there were less meetings and conferences. So that is a formula that I hope that we can look at. For us, we hope, and you're aware that we hope the General Assembly will approve funding for marketing purposes, I think that's certainly an area that we need, and we're limited at this point because of those revenues. So looking to really support the tourism recovery, specific to the city, who is definitely the lion's share of our total room revenue or room inventory. So I think that's pretty much our focus. And then getting people, once they start coming back here through our upcoming Amtrak service, and getting our new boutique hotel opened, getting that foot traffic back to downtown and certainly around the whole region is certainly our focus. Excited to hear maybe some of the feedback through the Roanoke City Parks this evening, and some of their aging facilities, because it would then become viable for us to host tennis tournaments or softball tournaments, and to really complement the area through sports activities, which again is somewhat of a long-term revenue proposal, looking at that from that perspective. So again, just really focused in on the tourism attractions, and really applaud the helping the artists and the arts community as they continue to do great work, and really did such a great job during the pandemic to keep their programming available virtually. And as they come back out of this, and hopefully increase their hours, that they see some assistance as well, because the arts community is really what keeps our quality of life, and in a lot of ways our families and our schools and our just citizens here have the opportunity to have that exposure through the arts community. So appreciate that support as well. And then I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in for the opportunity to grow the wayfinding system through the city and through the region. But first and foremost, there's already been a great foundation put in through the downtown pedestrian wayfinding. When you get visitors here, then they know where they're going, they feel comfortable, they feel welcome. Even residents who don't know what's here, it gives them that opportunity to know. So focused in on finishing out, or at least continuing on the progress that has been set forth through the regional wayfinding program, and certainly the city of Roanoke has taken a tremendous lead in that. Would like to see that continue. So those are some of the things that I see as hopefully helpful and long-term, because I know you don't want to set the stage for something that requires funding year after year after year. You want to see these programs have some value to them within the 2-year time frame or 3-year time frame. So those are some of the things that we hope that will be considered as it relates to funding for tourism, and certainly our schools and our children, and just the future of the city.
Very good, Catherine. Thank you. And Catherine raises a really good point that I do want to stress, which is, these are one-time dollars, as significant as they are. One of the other kind of guiding principles that the council has established is that, they need to be spent on items that can make a difference in light of them being one-time dollars, that it really doesn't serve anyone well to invest in something that's going to require continued reinvestment when those dollars are not there. And so, folks, just to give a little context to what Catherine mentioned as well on kind of the hospitality sides of things, it was by far the most impacted part of our local economy, and most local economies. And the organization that Catherine belongs to, Visit Virginia's Blue Ridge, is funded by basically revenues that are coming from people that stay in our community. And their budgets last year were reduced down to about 40% of what they normally are. And this year still are about half of what they normally are, because those revenues simply are not there. So when she talks about things like marketing dollars, they don't exist like they might have in the past. The state has identified at least an intent to use some of its $4 billion that I mentioned to go toward the effort of marketing tourism. It's not clear yet that we will necessarily benefit directly from that. And so there is an effort afoot to ensure that we will benefit from that piece of it. But definitely, when I say hospitality, I'm really talking, as Catherine did, this is the marketing of the community. It is certainly the hotels. In many instances, it's the restaurants and live performance venues. All of those were impacted, and all of their employees were impacted substantially. I'll give one anecdotal indication of that. The Civic Center, so the Berglund Center, where the city owns and operates, at one point during the pandemic, there were as few as 5 people employed by us in that organization, because there were no there were no activities going on in it. So it was only those that were necessary to actually keep the building operating, meaning really turning the lights on and off, because there just wasn't anything. So that's just one indicator of how impacted that side of the economy was. So thank you, Catherine. Judy, I saw you had unmuted as well. So
Right. I'm really concerned about the transportation piece also. Uh, the two other organizations that I've been volunteering with since I retired are AARP and the LOA. And there are elderly people that have a really difficult time getting around in Roanoke. They don't drive anymore. And I know we have a good bus service, but it seems to me we need to have something more and something better. And I know that this has been looked at a lot, and bus service being expanded into Roanoke County and that kind of thing. So anyway, I do think some of the money and when really good programs need to be out there to expand transportation, particularly for those who do not drive. This is a driving city. I hate to think I'm gonna have to give up my car someday because I don't know really how I'll get around. And I live in this little neighborhood very close to Virginia Western, and there are no sidewalks on my street. There are none. So I can't walk on Colonial, which is too busy. And when I walk out of my door and down, I live on Clearfield, and down toward Bramilton is too busy, and the sidewalk stops at, I think it's maybe Martin Lane. But anyway, we need more sidewalks. This is part of the city. We need more sidewalks. So all of this, and I know that's not technically transportation, but it would get me to Towers Mall, for example, if I could actually walk there, because I live within walking distance. It's just not safe for me to do it. So thinking along those lines, I hope there can be a plan in place, even if we don't do it all in 3 years. We will have allocated maybe some funds to be able to do that in the future.
yeah, and the city does, and I'm glad you mentioned sidewalks. The city does consider sidewalks, bike lanes, bike infrastructure, greenways, all a part of their transportation system, and so does the federal funding. So the federal funding, does identify those. And matter of fact, when we use some of the CARES Act funding to actually upgrade the trailheads at a number of our greenways, because they were seeing so much more usage that they were beginning to get wear and tear on them. So those are certainly legitimate expenditures for these kinds of funds and stuff as well. So thank you, Judy. Steve, you had unmuted. Is Steve still there? Or is he frozen?
Yes, thanks, Bob. And
Okay.
kind of continuing along with the transportation theme, I noticed driving around the city, a lot of folks who use the bus system, when they're waiting for the bus, there's no place for them to sit. Sometimes they're sitting on the ground or on a guardrail, and there aren't very many bus shelters, to overhead to keep the rain off of people when they're waiting for the bus. So I think something like that, it seems kind of simple, but might make a big difference in the lives of folks who depend on the bus to get around town. The second thing that kind of comes to mind, strikes me that we're seeing a lot more gun violence in the last year or so, just shootings, and that's troubling enough, but what is even more troubling, and this is just kind of anecdotally, I'm not keeping statistics or tracking it, but it seems like there is a lot more gun violence among younger teenagers than we've seen in the past. So if it's possible to use some of this money to address some of that, the root causes of gun violence, and particularly among teenagers, I think that would be something worth looking into.
Sorry, my dog needed attention. So, yeah, Steve. I think two points. One is the your anecdotal evidence actually is valid. Actually, there are indeed increases, obviously here locally, but certainly nationally, in not only obviously acts of gun violence, but in particular acts of gun violence that involve either victims or offenders that are getting younger and younger. So that actually is borne out by the evidence. And even if it weren't explicit in the Rescue Act that was passed by Congress, recently the White House actually issued some additional clarification that made it very clear that these funds can indeed be used to address gun violence in a variety of different ways. And so certainly as we start to look at ways to align what we choose to do here with what others might also be spending money on, it is very likely that that will become a part of the mix because, again, obviously $64.5 million is a lot of money, but if you can take some of that and match it up with something that the state is spending money on or the federal government is spending money on, you'll stretch those dollars even further. So definitely, I think that that concept, that topic of gun violence is absolutely a legitimate part of what is able to be spent upon. And again, part of the argument for that is, though not the sole cause, certainly some aspect of the increase in gun violence is associated with really the sort of the circumstances surrounding COVID and the isolation or the economic loss or whatever it might be. So that's part of the justification that's used for that. So thank you. Well, I appreciate the input and the insights that you all have. What I'd like to do is just spend the next couple of seconds here kind of reminding you and anybody else that will join in either by viewing this live or may see this as a recording later is, again, this is just one of a number of ways in which we are trying to learn from you all and from other members of our community as to where their priorities are and what their ideas are. So I would encourage folks to continue to monitor our social media as well as our website to continue to see more information and more opportunities like this to come out so that they too can join in this conversation. Once the panel is assembled, we'll probably talk with them about other ways that they may want to get public information as well. So there could be, the panel will actually be meeting in person. So all of their meetings will be open to the public. Folks can come in with it. They may choose to do some public hearings. They may convene some virtual kinds of meetings. Don't know that yet until they're assembled, but certainly would encourage folks to take that opportunity. And most importantly and most directly, you don't have to wait for those opportunities. Anyone that has an idea or has thoughts about this should feel free to email or call the city, either myself or Angie, and we'll take that information and make sure that it gets in front of this panel as well as in front of ultimately the council so that they know what the community is thinking the priorities really ought to be and focused on as well. So I very much appreciate your participation in this. And again, if you all have any questions after this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Or, as soon as we click leave meeting and you think, oh, that was a great idea, don't worry, you can certainly send that to us as you conclude as well. So I appreciate it. And any last thoughts or comments? Otherwise we will shut her down. So not seeing it. Well, again, I really appreciate it. Thank you, Angie. Thank you for orchestrating the recordings and everything. For anyone that joined us live on Facebook, certainly appreciate their participation in this as well, and look forward to the next. We actually will be doing another one of these tomorrow on July 21st at 6 p.m. Just as another opportunity for folks to join in, both through the webinar and or on Facebook Live. And again, there may be more as we go forward. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for your great ideas and your participation. I very much appreciate it. So have a good day.
Thank you, Bob and Angie.